This is Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Kerry-Ann Williams. I'm a psychiatrist practicing here in Massachusetts. And this is a podcast that's about everything related to mental wellness in the Black community and beyond. Today, I'm going to be talking about the link between food security and mental health. And joining me today are some graduate students from William James College: Olivia Fenty, Alyssa Cetoute, Ashley Halloway, and Ajaycia Jackson. I'm going to add them to the podcast now. So welcome to the podcast. I'm going to start off with some introductions. Alyssa, introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Alyssa Cetoute, and I am a third-year doctoral student at William James with a concentration in African and Caribbean mental health.
And we have Olivia Fenty.
Hi, my name is Olivia Fenty, and I'm in my second year of the clinical mental health counseling program at William James, and I also have a concentration in African and Caribbean mental health.
And Ashley Halloway.
Hello, my name is Ashley Halloway. I am a second year in the clinical mental health program. I also have a concentration in the African and Caribbean mental health concentration.
And Ajaycia Jackson.
Hi, everyone. I am also in the master's program for clinical mental health counseling. I'm in my second year, and I also have a concentration in African and Caribbean mental health.
All right, great. Well, it's so wonderful to have you guys here with me to talk about the link between food insecurity and mental health. So I guess let's start off with that. Why did you guys think it was important to talk about food insecurity on a mental health podcast?
It's really important to, have food and for overall wellness, basically if you are starved, your body doesn't function the way it needs to, including your brain and your neurons. And that could lead to so many different issues, including mental illness, depression, anxiety, all sorts of different comorbid issues that could come up. So that's why we thought it was very important to, look into mental health, or not mental health, food disparities.
And if you think about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those physiological needs such as like food, shelter, water, if those aren't met, it's hard to address like the other mental health needs such as, maybe depression or anxiety when you're in survival mode.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely right. I think sometimes in the mental health world, we see folks, we want to do therapy with them. I might want to prescribe medications. And if they're not even getting food, how can any of these interventions really help them? So that's completely right. Now, you guys did some research on this topic. Did you find that there's any particular demographics of folks that are most vulnerable to food insecurity, especially in our area in Boston?
I think one thing that kind of stuck out to me is those who are in the lower socioeconomic status. So I know we're also talking about Black mental health, but just kind of looking at like the poverty line and who's within that, I think is something interesting. But also from our research, I think we found that a lot of like Black and Brown communities also suffer with food insecurities, not having access to quality or nutritional food. So I think that's also another thing that kind of influenced us choosing this topic, because we have a personal connection to it in some ways. So just from that research, I think it was interesting to see who's most affected by it.
One thing to watch out for as well is people who are living in relative poverty, not just, abject poverty. People who live in those nice fancy houses, but compared to their neighbors are struggling to get by. and still needs food stamps in order, to continue to live the lifestyle that they're living.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Ashley, because I think, one of the next things I was going to kind of think about was, is it sometimes difficult to identify, who has food insecurity and who doesn't? Because, sometimes we're thinking, oh, maybe folks who are food insecure will look a certain way or act a certain way. And I think sometimes that's completely not a good way to kind of tell. So I'm glad you mentioned that sometimes there are folks that they might live actually in a nice house, but relatively they're struggling financially and with food. Yeah. Now, are there barriers to individuals kind of coming forward and asking for help with food resources that you've identified?
Yeah, I think that one barrier could be like stigma or embarrassment. I think that's a really big one, and like just not wanting to feel judged and to feel like you can't provide for your family. I think another barrier is also just not knowing that you can ask for these resources and that there are ways for you to get help. I think that sometimes a lot of people will think that, well, I just have to deal with this for myself. And don't really realize that there are so many different resources and programs and things that they can apply for that could really be helpful. And I think also another quick one is just different like requirements, like kind of similar to what Ashley was talking about, that because they may make a certain amount of money, they might not qualify for certain things, but that doesn't mean that they aren't in need of those things.
Yeah. I guess it makes me think, as mental health providers, then, should we be asking people, as part of the routine part of our assessment, if someone might be feeling embarrassed or they may not know of the resources, then is some of the burden on us to say, let's just bring it up. Let's ask about it and let's let people know. I mean, is that kind of the sentiment here?
Most certainly. As part of my internship, actually, it's part of our training is to make sure that our clients are food secure, that they've got, warm clothes for the winter, that they've got appropriate clothing for all seasons. We make sure that they're connected to the resources that they need. And if they're not, we drop the mental health piece until all of the case management stuff is taken care of. So if they don't have enough to eat, we make sure that they're on as many programs as we can find for them. That's our first priority, because we can't take care of the mind until the body is set,
Yeah, and to kind of echo off of Ashley, I think also with being at William James and like a lot of the classes that I've taken, they also stress looking at the person as a whole and not necessarily just the mental health piece. So also referring back to what Alyssa mentioned about the hierarchy of needs, it's like asking these questions like, when's the last time you had a meal, or where are you staying right now? Do you have access to clothes or access to transportation? I think it's really important for us as mental health professionals to really ask those questions, which is something that hasn't always been historically done. So I'm just really glad, and like our training and our instruction at school, they're really kind of putting this in the back of our mind so that we don't continue to not address this need.
And is there anything that would be helpful for us to know about, like, who qualifies and who doesn't qualify, just in general, for certain kinds of resources in terms of, because I know we're, I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit about like where we find resources and things like that. But before we get there, as you mentioned, some people might not qualify in terms of their finances. What are some of the other things to think about in terms of qualifying? You guys know. It might be primarily finances?
I think it's primarily finances too. I know as well, like at my field placement, making sure to ask about if employment and if, our patients are unemployed, connecting to them with, resources or community partners that can help provide some of those resources for them, whether it's like the food pantries, the community fridges, or even partnering within the organization to help access some of those resources.
Okay. And so then, if someone does disclose to you as a mental health professional that they don't know where their next meal is coming from, what's usually, what should they expect? What's going to happen next in that discussion?
Well, one thing I think is kind of great about the counseling process is that it's a collaborative effort. So the counselor and the patient can work together to try and find the best resources. I'm thinking like if a client of mine walked into the office, like what would I do personally? And I think using resources like the community fridges or like the food banks or things that don't really have qualifying things or don't have any financial connection to it, I think would be great, but also looking into more long-term resources as well. But I think the next thing I would do is kind of work together with them. We can work together to kind of research what would be feasible, what would be realistic in order to address that need, and then maybe looking into something that would be more consistent. So like the community food fridges or the weekly food pantries or the food markets, things like that, things that would actually be applicable and relevant to them, I think is really, really important.
Okay.
At my current placement, we have Care Navigator, and that can connect you with pro bono, like legal services, food resources, and links to places that you can go, connecting people with the DTA, the Department of Transactional Assistance, so that they can go there and see if they do qualify and maybe even get emergency benefits temporarily so that they can feed their families. And I know with COVID, they have extra relief for those who are experiencing or are using DTA as an added resource.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's, I know you guys all did some research on community fridge locations around the area. You kind of checked some of them out, made some observations about what you found when you got there. And so I wanted to find out a little bit more about where you went and what you found. And for our listeners out there, even though a lot of this is going to be specific to Boston, I think some of the observations and some of the discussion that we'll have may be more generally applicable in terms of what other cities might be going through as well. So I'm going to start with Ajaycia. Where did you go and what did you find?
So I went to a lot of the community fridge locations in the Boston area. So I went to the Fenway location, the Jamaica Plain location, the one in Mattapan, one in Roslindale, and then one by Northeastern. And I kind of went into it with a lens like, okay, would I actually use this resource? Like if it was me and I needed some food, like would I feel comfortable going to this location? And overall, I did feel really comfortable going to the locations in terms of finding them, the cleanliness, like the maintenance of the fridge itself. But one thing I did find interesting was, I guess, probably based on the time of day I also went, which is also a contributing factor, but certain locations I noticed had less food than others. More specifically, like the one in Mattapan, for an example. And I'm also a resident of Mattapan, so I found this to be really interesting. But just something that kind of sparked in my mind, just keeping that in mind, like the level of engagement in the community and what they're able to provide for those locations is something that came up for me because when I went to the Roslindale one, it was fully stocked. It was really, really nice. And it seemed like there's a lot of community engagement and community connection there. But then when I look at the Mattapan community fridge, it was pretty much empty. And I just found that to be interesting based on who lives in the areas and who is able to engage and actually give back. So that was something that I found to be really interesting in my investigation. And also I was able to find another good resource for those who are in the Mattapan area. There's a weekly food pantry that goes on Monday 2:30 to 4, and they create care baskets to just hand out to any family or any persons in need. So I was just really happy to see that there are resources for people, those who may need some extra support or who may just need something until their next meal or their next paycheck or things like that. But I was just really happy to see that we do have the resources here in Boston, because I'm very aware of the need of having nutritional and quality food. So overall, I was really happy with what I was seeing, but it kind of sparked some thinking on like what we could do for some of the community fridges that don't have that consistent support as other ones.
And so these community fridges are primarily stocked by donations of that kind of surrounding community.
Yeah, primarily so.
Okay, and so then there's some disparities depending on the resources of that community. Some are going to be really nicely stocked and very well kept, and then others are kind of lacking in some ways.
Yes. That's definitely what I noticed, like the disparities even between the resources and the locations in the city. So
Did you find fresh foods or primarily kind of shelf stable foods?
I did find a lot of like fresh fruit. I'm sorry, fresh fruit and vegetables. They looked really good. I would actually taken them. And then I did find some like snacks, like some Cheetos, or it was a mixed bag depending on where it was at. But a lot of the time I did see a lot of like snacks and then just some fruits, bread, some lettuce, like things I think to kind of use multiple different like items with. But yeah, that was primarily what I saw.
Okay. All right. And then Alyssa, where did you go and what did you find?
So I went to the Somerville Community Fridge in Winter Hill and Union Square. I got to go to St. Clemens in Medford and also Harvard Square. The community fridges there. And I was really happy to see that the fridges were very well stocked. And I got to talk to people at each of the fridges. I had the opportunity, at one of the fridges in Winter Hill to talk to a community member who was dropping off and who had dropped off at all 3 of the fridges that were in Somerville. So it was nice to talk to her and see, what her like routine was like with that. And she said, every couple of weeks she'll stop by and drop off fresh produce, which was nice. So when I went to the fridge in Union Square, I saw that there were fresh veggies, fresh fruit. The fridges in Winter Hill also had fresh veggies and fruit and some frozen goods. One of the unique things about the community fridge in Winter Hill is that it's actually attached to somebody's home. And so that was what kept that community fridge going. They maintain it. It's right in front of their house. They pay for the electricity, which was nice. It might not be a realistic expectation for everyone to attach it to their home, but it was nice to see that these people were willing to open their home to the community and stock it, in addition to other community members providing some food to that fridge. Even the artwork in Union Square, it had really beautiful artwork on the fridge, around the pantry. It was welcoming. They had notes in different languages. So they had it in Spanish, they had it in English, and on the side of the fridges, they also had it in some other languages that I wasn't familiar with, which was nice to see. It was very welcoming, very clean, as well as the other ones in Harvard Square. It's kind of in like a pantry with a shed built around it. But yes, they were all very well stocked. So that was good to see. And with fresh foods, because I know some of us had experiences where people would put like half-eaten food into the fridges. And that's actually something that they put on the fridge rules, like the do's and don'ts of what to give, not putting spoiled food into the fridge, and, respecting others who are using the fridge. So I thought that was really nice and beautiful to see, and that they were so welcoming so that families do feel empowered. In speaking to one of the staff at the Dunkin' Donuts that the community fridge is behind on Prospect Street, she was saying that it's very active and there's always, especially in the morning, people coming in and using the fridges. So that was also nice to hear that it's being used. People in the community know about it, because oftentimes too, people might not be familiar with that resource and know that it's something that they can, take and for free.
That's great. And yeah, because I was going to ask about whether people sometimes try to donate things that are not appropriate because that happens with all kinds of donations, even like, clothing, furniture. People always try to donate things that they don't want, but not really thinking about, it needs to be something that someone would want.
Right. And it's just like respect, level of respect too. Nobody wants to eat your half-eaten food. So, providing, that fresh food. And I liked that they had a variety of different fruits, a variety of veggies, and frozen food too.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, Ashley, what did you find? Where did you go?
So I went to the 3 fridges in Malden. And I went to the 2 fridges in Brighton. So first, I want to talk about my experience in Malden. I was very heartbroken by what I saw there. There was a lot of half-eaten stuff, leftovers, rotting food. It doesn't look like anybody really takes care of it. It's just somebody donates, electricity for the fridge, and then that's the amount of care that is given to the fridge. And it's up to the community to, donate food. And, you can't expect the people who need the resources to be donated the resources. And so I found that very heartbreaking. There was one site that is connected to a community garden. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like the garden and the fridge are like in communication. So like the food from the garden doesn't go into the fridge or anything like that. But it looked like I got there just after the garden closed, so there was nobody to talk to. But the garden was beautiful, well stocked, well taken care of. There were signs of recent harvest of like greens, and it was educational the way it was laid out. There was signs that said, these are collard greens, you can cook them in this way and stuff like that. And I really liked that. It was educational as well as nutritious. So at least they had the community garden going. And the garden was large, quite large. It spanned maybe 2 or 3 blocks, I think. Yeah. So quite big, quite substantial. So at least, if anything, people could get food from there, fresh greens, fresh vegetables, fresh fruits from there. And then the fridges were dirty, like I said. So no general upkeep, which is something I think needs to change. If somebody's going to sponsor a fridge, they also need to sponsor the time to take care of it, or somebody needs to sponsor the time to take care of it as well. But moving on to my experience in Brighton, I forget the name of the church that it was connected to, but it was the Brighton Community Fridge is what it was called. And it was connected to a church, and the fridge was empty, but it was much cleaner. And there's a pantry connected. And there were flyers from the church advertising a food drive in order to fill the fridge. So that told me that the church actually is taking an active role in providing for the fridge and for the community. They want to take care of the fridge and help with the community. And also at that church is a thrift store for very cheap. So people of the community who need things can go and, buy their clothes, and it doesn't feel like charity. You're paying, you might be paying very cheap prices, but you're paying, and it's charity with dignity, I think, is how I felt about it. The last one I looked up was at a deli, and it's been so long, I've forgotten the name of the deli. I want to say it's Olivia's Deli or something like that. And unfortunately, that deli had to close their fridge because the owner of the building was afraid of people getting sick off of the food that was in the fridge. But the way the owner of the deli was talking, it sounded like the deli would take their food that they couldn't sell at the end of the night and stock the fridge with it. And they were paying the electricity and everything for it. So Brighton was doing really good in terms of making sure that there was something in the fridge for people to go to. And the owner of the deli told me, there was somebody at least every day coming and taking food. Whoever needed it, had no trouble coming. And so, Brighton sort of lifted my spirits when it came to these fridges, because I was expecting the worst again after Malden. But yeah, that was my experience. And I got to see sort of two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, interesting kind of disparate experiences with various places. So Olivia, where did you go and what did you find out?
So I live in Fitchburg, so I went to the community fridges in Worcester, and then I went to one in Leominster. So the 4 that I went to in Worcester are part of a collective called Woo Fridge. And they also have like a very strong like social media presence on Instagram, and also a very like detailed website that's constantly updated. So all of the fridges for the most part were very well stocked. They had a lot of vegetables, some had a lot of fruit. They also had like a conjoining pantry on the side with a lot of personal items that people could get. One fridge also had like pre-packaged food that people can grab, and it had like apples and then like a sandwich. There was one fridge, I believe it was on Portland Street in Worcester, that wasn't well stocked. It seems like there was kind of like I'm not sure if it was collard greens or lettuce, but there was like a big thing of lettuce, I guess. And it seemed like it had been there for a while, and that was the only thing that was there. And then I tried to open the conjoining pantry, and it seems like it was locked. So that was kind of the only one that was kind of disappointing. But when I did look on the Instagram, it showed that they have guidelines about what you can and cannot put into the fridges. They also have a group chat with all of the volunteers that you can join through Instagram if you want to be a part of the people that maintain the fridge and stock it. There was also just a lot of constant updates about the fridges. Like somebody would take a picture of it for this week to show what's in it. And I just saw a lot of those pictures as I was scrolling. So I felt at least with the Worcester one, it was very accessible and very like if you had a social media account or even like access to their website, you can constantly be notified about where the fridges are and kind of what's in them. And similar to kind of what everybody said, they are mostly upkept by people in the community. There was one that was attached to a pizza place. And then there was also one that was attached to a community center. So for the one that was in Leominster, unfortunately, it wasn't as well stocked, but there was a conjoining pantry and like large kind of like book collection that people can kind of take free books from. When I did look in the fridge, it seemed like there was like stuffing, and then like I believe it was some type of like cranberry stuff. So like just stuff that you could use for Thanksgiving, but it seems like somebody had already come and taken out some of the food already. And that one was connected to a house. When I did kind of look at all of the fridges, I thought a lot about like accessibility, like just in terms of where they can access like constant updates about the fridge, and then also just like where the fridges are located. And it got me thinking about like how comfortable somebody might be if a fridge is located in a very residential area, or if it's like connected to a house that is in a very residential area. Is somebody going to feel comfortable walking up to a fridge, and like things like that. And I thought especially with Leominster, and also just like the demographic of who primarily lives in Leominster, even when I kind of walked up, I was a little nervous, because it was a very kind of, it was a very residential street, and it kind of seemed like people were just kind of outside looking a little bit. So I could only imagine like somebody kind of going up there, they wouldn't feel as comfortable. But in comparison, the ones in Worcester were located in very kind of open streets, and they weren't connected to houses. So I assume that people would feel a lot more comfortable going up there. I also thought a lot about, when I looked inside the fridges, I thought a lot about like different dietary restrictions and like how they would account for things like that. And then also accounting for just not everybody's going to like, the same kinds of food. So how do you figure out like what kinds of food you're going to put in there? And especially if you have a diverse community, are you putting food that is more applicable to the cultures that live in that environment? So you're not just kind of putting more like Americanized food that they don't want to eat. So yeah, I did enjoy kind of looking at all the fridges, because I feel like it got me thinking about those things. I never really thought about those things. But for the most part, like I said, it was the ones in Worcester were primarily very well stocked. And I don't know if I mentioned, but the one in Leominster is primarily run by the person whose house it's connected to. So I think that also kind of plays a role in what is actually in the fridge, because it seems as though she's the only person upkeeping it. And then unfortunately in Fitchburg, there isn't a community fridge. So it seems like the closest one is located in Leominster.
Oh, those are the really, really interesting observations, because it makes us think about the marketing, really, because I hadn't even really thought about that, but that it makes sense that how are people knowing about the location, what's in it, how are people being reminded that it's there and it can be used, but also marketing for people to donate. So it just seems as though the more successful fridges are the ones where there's someone actively both marketing that the fridge is there, but also marketing for donations, and is kind of very, very present. And there's kind of maybe some energy around it, even to kind of help people to remember, hey, don't forget this fridge is here, it needs food, and that there's kind of a specific path for how it's upkept and that sort of thing. Whereas the ones that maybe are forgotten, maybe even difficult to find, and that sort of thing. So very, very interesting. And then thinking also about the types of foods, right? Because thinking about the community, and that's exactly right. I mean, what about fresh foods that are like related to other cultures? What about, I think about from the Caribbean, we have, ripe plantain, green bananas. It's like, these are all things that like maybe Americans are not into, but Afro-Caribbean populations are into. And it's actually not necessarily difficult to find in terms of people buying it and donating it, because there are supermarkets that sell that. So that's a really interesting, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So, I mean, any other thoughts that you guys had as you kind of hear what each other found, and just thinking about the patterns and like what do these community fridges need, and what do you want people to kind of think about? Any other comments?
I think just from hearing everyone's experience kind of helped to reflect on mine, just seeing the differences and the engagement, the level of marketing and the donations, like you were just talking about. So, and as Ashley mentioned before, it's like you can't really ask the people who are in need to provide the resources that they need. So it kind of got me thinking of like, what can the fridges that don't have that support, like, what can we realistically do to make sure that the fridges are stocked and they are maintained. And I think one big part of it is community engagement with the marketing and with the trying to find donations. So just in me trying to like brainstorm potential ways to like overcome this barrier, I think leaning to the community just in terms of outreaching and connecting to people and spreading the message and making it more of a community effort, I think could be like a long lasting way to kind of increase the engagement and make sure that the resources are available for people. So, you know, people in the community who are passionate about this issue and you're interested in making marketing materials or social media content creation or things like that, I think it's a good way to kind of appeal to them and try and bring them in and not only enhance their skills and things like that, but also have them more connected to the community and trying to make a positive impact. So that was something that came up for me because I was really interested to hear my classmates' experiences. And I was so thrilled to hear that some of them are connected to a house, like they have like constant, frequent community engagement. So I'm like, what can we do, especially in the Boston area, to try and get the same thing going? So that was something I thought could be a little far-fetched, but I think that really relying on the community in a different way rather than just providing the actual resources could be a really good way to overcome even more of the barriers that impact the use of these resources.
I found that in like my research too. You know, it takes individuals, organizations, small businesses to really also kind of like step up to give back into that community. I know how we were highlighting earlier, we can't rely on the people who need the resource to also replenish. And so by having these different organizations and talking to people, it says on average, it costs an extra $30 a month to provide electricity for some of those fridges for people who are considering and thinking about, you know, starting their own community fridge. A lot of the fridges had like a QR code or a website that you can go to for more information on donations, or even like email to set up for notifications when they are doing pantries and drives, which I thought was great. But I also know some of the families in the communities might not have internet access where they can look these things up or go on social media. So I think really partnering with like community centers, you know, and having also disseminating this information, not just like electronically, which is great, but also having like handouts and pamphlets so that people can have access and know, because they're out there and there's so many. It's just people don't know where or how to access them and what that might look like.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention like having people, or just having people designated to do these things. Like in Malden, there weren't signs for drives or you know, how to donate, other than, you know, these are the things that you can donate, these are the things you can't, you know. So just having a way to have people sign up to be in charge of, you know, filling the fridge, or like, you know, maybe donate, or I'll be in charge of electricity, I'll be in charge of cleaning the fridge, I'll be in charge of stocking this kind of produce. I'll be in charge of stocking this kind of items. That kind of community collaboration would be really helpful, I think, in some communities.
I also thought about just kind of how important it could be to consider like the community that you're serving, like similar to what we were talking about, like what are the demographics of the people in this community? What types of food do they eat? What languages do they speak, to ensure that everybody has as much access to the fridge as possible? I also thought about kind of going off of Alyssa's point of just collaborating with food pantries in the community, community mental health centers, to ensure that they have signs up of when these fridges are available and like what they have in them. And then another point I also thought about is ensuring that the fridges are close to public transportation and that they're not always kind of off of a highway or in a residential area that's not easy to kind of walk around in. I think that would be very important in terms of just making sure everybody has access to it, and also making sure everybody feels comfortable enough to walk up to it and get food.
Yeah, I think that was a really valid point, is that the location does matter. I mean, I think it does feel awkward to be in somebody's neighborhood if it's not your neighborhood, regardless of which neighborhood it is. It's just kind of like just weird, to kind of feel like I'm going to this place. It's other people live here and I'm going to this fridge to get food. Is somebody going to misinterpret what I'm doing here? Is somebody going to, wonder why I'm walking around? Versus if it's in a kind of a more kind of major city area, or as you mentioned, close to public transportation, there might be less questions. Maybe people might not even notice because there's more people around. So that I think location is kind of a huge part of it, and public transportation, huge part of it. So the person doesn't have to travel too far. And then even after they've gotten their food, they have to travel this way with the food that they've kind of like gotten from the fridge. It's the logistics can be quite a hassle. I think this has been a great discussion. I mean, I really am grateful for the research that you guys have done in terms of going to the fridges, looking at what they, what they look like, the upkeep of it, the factors that seem to help to make some more successful than others, and then kind of providing this vital information to our listeners about, what the various areas. I mean, not just Boston, but also kind of Worcester, kind of Metro West Boston, if you will, to kind of get a wide variety of approaches. And so I guess we'll kind of end for now. I think this has been a great discussion. I don't know if anybody has any final kind of comments or anything like that. Nope. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining Black Mental Health Matters with Dr. Kerry-Ann. And for those of you listening, thank you for listening in today. And I will talk with you again next week. So have a great week. Bye.